Hi everybody, welcome back. Cindy Daychuck with Queen Bee Creations, and we're here for part two. Well, if I hold up two hands, it looks like four. So part two of painting this fabric chair. Now, yesterday, for those of you that were with me, we had started off with this pale. I think it's kind of a pale, kind of caramel kind of color. Um, and we did one coat yesterday of our paint wash. Now, I was using, for the first time ever, paint called Country Chic, and it is one of the all-in-one paints. I've used any Sloan in the past with great success. I've used DIY paint with great success. Both work wonderfully. So one's a chalk paint, one's a clay paint. Both work great for painting on a fabric chair. Both of them I did seal with wax. Again, not sure if I'm going to be sealing this one or not because it's got a little bit of a raised pile. But both worked great using exactly the same technique. So I wanted to see with one of the all-in-ones, which technically I won't have to seal, that I don't have to worry about any of the paint in the fabric coming off if you're safe to sit in white pants. But I'm not sure about the feel. The wax really gives a lovely texture to the painted fabric. And so we'll see when this is done if I feel like I need to add the wax just for a textural piece. I don't think I need it for sealing, but it remains to be seen. Now, this color was one that was kind of, I kind of had my heart set on using a DIY paint for this, which is called Water Lily, which is kind of a periwinkle blue. I wanted something that was a little bright, a little bit fresh, a little bit springy. You know, we were having some sunny days here for a change, and I wanted to roll with it. But I didn't have much left, and I couldn't get enough of it from my supplier. She didn't have any in stock, have to ship from the States, and for those that know me, not willing to wait. So when I get an idea, I have to roll with it right away, in which case I started researching other paints that were in my area that had colors I could use to combine to get a similar color, because this is a color I wanted. I needed to go with it, which led me to discovering Country Chic. Quite honestly, I hadn't really heard of it before. But some of the other paints I was familiar with, I would have had to have played a lot with the paint colors to do some blending, which means I end up buying way more paint than I need. They had a chart on their website with some formulas for blended colors. And this color is a combination of two of their colors. One, which is called Midnight Sky, which is kind of a light navy, if you can have a light navy. Light navy kind of means it's not navy, but it's not a royal blue. It's not quite a deep navy blue. And this color, which you can see so much better today, which is called Vintage Cupcake. So it's kind of a pale pink, which leads me to believe any paint line that you know that if they don't have a periwinkle, start with this to be able to get a combination. I used 50% in the mix to be able to get this. Now, I'm not really religious about the mixing of this. I'm not taking a measuring cup. I'm doing little plastic disposable spoons, and I did like 7 spoonfuls, stirred them together. So I probably have a little bit more of one, a little bit less of another, and then I started kind of balancing it out a little bit. Having said that, I mixed up a Tupperware bowl, this size, not Tupperware, just like a disposable little cheapy thing. It was about 2/3 full yesterday. I used all of it on the chair. So I remixed. In doing that, I thought, a couple of tips for you, things that I do that I didn't mention yesterday. One, as soon as I've mixed up the first batch of paint, I always assume I'm going to need more. I would rather remix some than making a whole honking huge batch of it that exceeds what I need for this, and then I'm left with okay, what else am I going to do with this color? I'd rather have more of the original colors left in my paint stash that I could mix and blend or just use as is. So I like to kind of mix as I go. I wanted to mix enough to get one coat on, and I just got the one coat. So about 3/4, let's go with 3/4. Once I'd added water to it, the little plastic container was about 3/4 of full, and I was done. But one of the things that I did do that I didn't share with you was I had poured off a small little, kind of a Dixie cup full sample container of it. So that when I was mixing the paint today, when I thought, oh, I had something to be able to look against to see what the original color was while it was still wet. So you want to compare wet to wet, because often paint looks different when it's dry. So just doing a little dot on a color card might not cut it. You might end up with something different. So I wanted to start with something close enough, in which case I can do an eyeball. When I thought that I had it, like to my eye, pretty darn close, what I do is I then take a couple of drops of the paint from the Dixie cup, just pour a little bit in, and I look to see when it's sitting on top of the other paint, do they look the same? And if it was if it was darker, right, the mix was darker, then I added in a little bit more of the midnight blue. If that final mix was a little bit lighter, then I added in a little bit more of the vintage Cupcake, a little bit more of the pink. And you get a better color match. When I poured another drop in and it looked spot on, I just dumped the rest of the Dixie cup in, stir it all up, off I go, pour off a small amount again, just in case. The fabric is going to take paint differently now that it's already been painted once than it did when it hadn't been painted at all, right? So depending upon your fabric, it may take more, it may take less paint this time. So you're going to mix up your batch, but have that little Dixie cup off to the side in case you have to mix up some more. The other tip, the back of this is separate from the rest of the chair in so much as it's got these wooden borders on either side. So it's not a continuous piece here, which means these pieces and the arms rolling down, if I had to mix another batch of paint and it wasn't spot on, you're going to be able to tell. But you won't tell if it's slightly off on the back, because it's going to have the borders of the white separating. So if it was slightly darker, you're not going to know. So I'll always leave it to the end, so that if I'm using some of the dregs of the paint, or I ran out and I needed to mix another batch, I'll use it on that section that's just kind of separate. Does that make sense? The other piece is because I've already got one coat on, if this second coat isn't quite the same, you're not going to know, because it's going over top of all of this. So if your second batch is a little bit lighter, a little bit darker, that's okay, because it's all going to be mixed and blended on the piece. Okay? So a couple of things to think about, especially bear that in mind if you're doing a bigger piece than this. If you're doing maybe, somebody yesterday I think was talking about that they had a love seat or a small couch that was kind of similar fabric, and they had been thinking about painting it and were hesitating. Well, again, in that case, you're going to be guessing at the beginning about how much paint you need. Though bear in mind how much paint I used for this chair and what I'm done with. I will say, so if we're just looking at, hang on, need glasses. So these containers are 16 US fluid ounces. So that's about 2 cups, right? 8 ounces is 1 cup. Okay, so 2 cups. I have probably used in total now, with the second batch of paint that I've mixed up and the first batch, I have used in total, probably they're both about half full. So I've used in total 16 ounces of paint. Okay, so just if that helps you kind of judge territory, right? Hey, Anta, I don't know if I'm saying that right. Hopefully I'm saying it right. Now, the other tip, whoa, somebody coming through the front door, and the dog just took off with my camera. So the other tip that I have for you, if you look at the video yesterday and I kind of showed you the texture of the paint, today you'll notice it's a little bit more liquid because the fabric now is a little bit less porous. All right, so I want it a little bit more liquid so it soaks in a little bit better. Okay, hopefully that makes sense too. So I've mixed that up with just a little bit more water, just a little bit more liquid. And you know, I'm not giving you the amount of liquid that I added because it's just really dependent upon the paint that you're using. Some paint is a little bit more liquid. I will say the blue here was significantly thicker than the pink. I used the same amount roughly, but texturally, you know, my clay-based paints are typically a lot thicker than the chalk paints are. These are actually a clay-based paint as well. So the darker color is a little bit thicker. Not having used this paint before, I don't know if that's typical or not. But the other thing that we had spoken about yesterday was I going to sand the piece in between coats? And originally I had said, I don't think so. However, when I came downstairs and I felt the dry sections, I changed my mind. They were crusty. So I did, so here, it just feels like normal fabric. I sanded this. You can almost feel how much rougher that side is. So all I took was a sanding block, and I took a sanding block that's a little bit used already, so it's not fully coarse. And hang on, I think that you can still see me over here doing this. I just lightly rubbed the fabric and even the trim, because the trim gets crusty too. Rub the trim as well. Just lightly. It sounds worse than it is. And I'm just knocking off the top of the paint. And you can take your hand and rub it along, and you'll be able to feel where you hit and where you missed. So if you missed a spot. Now I left that side to be able to do with you one, because you don't want to hear me sanding the whole time. But then I take a vacuum, and I just kind of, just in case there's some dust on it. So I didn't want you to have to live through the vacuum, and we can at least be working on and painting this section. The other piece that I will do today as well is, as much as I kind of, sorry, while I'm repositioning here, as much as yesterday I was just kind of using my big paintbrush and dabbing along here, and then I just took a wet cloth after and wiped the blue paint off of the wood. I'm going to be painting over the wood, but because I'm doing it in white, I didn't want to have to cover a lot of the blue in addition to the dark wood. But today I will be taking a smaller art brush and kind of really working it into some of the crevices. We got really good coverage, and I'm not sure what you guys can see in the video or not, but you can still see some of that original color peeking through. I am, however, quite hopeful and am thinking that I'm going to be able to get away with just 2 coats. So we'll see. Have to take a look tomorrow, but I'm thinking that if I needed to do any more, it'd just maybe be some touch-ups in some areas that faded. Yesterday, this big jug of water, probably with wetting the fabric and painting, I probably went through about half the water. So probably that gives you a little bit of an idea of how damp you're making and how much water you're using on your piece. Again, we don't want to totally saturate it. You're going to find that it will take in a little bit less water today because of the paint that's already on it, but we're kind of soaking in deeper and around the areas that have already accepted a lot of paint. Okay. I did have somebody that messaged me yesterday, and I don't know what happened with the feed. I don't have the original video up on the site. It didn't load to my site, but anybody, I think, that was watching it live yesterday does have it still. So I did have some people still able to message me through the original live video, even though I don't have it in. I don't have it. But I did save it to my phone, so I was able to upload it to YouTube. So if you missed the first video, you can go to Queen Bee Creations on YouTube, look for my same paint splatter logo, and it's loaded there. I'll also load these ones here for those of you that just want to watch the series at some time, but if you want to catch the first video, you can go back there as well. And if you wanted a written version of kind of the steps in terms of painting, something to reference back, then go to the website. So Queen Bee Creations 1, number 1.com, and there's some blog postings, and you'll see the big boho blue daisy chair that I had painted using DIY paint, but I've written out all of the steps that I did as well. So I am recommending sanding, even with a deeper pile. It really didn't change the texture of this at all. You're really just knocking off some of the paint that's laying on the top. But I did have somebody that messaged me about, they had tried painting a chair, but they're still finding like a couple of weeks later that they've got paint flaking off if people sit. What I indicated there is that the mistake I think that was made is that you were painting the chair, meaning you're painting it like you would wood, which means that you were laying the paint down on top of the fabric. If you recall yesterday, I was kind of swirling the paint down in. So one, you want to water it down. You don't want to just use it straight out of the can, even if some videos show you to do that. I strongly urge you, don't do that. Don't follow them. And maybe they're having great success with that, but I don't think that you will, and I don't want you to be disheartened that you followed them exactly and you didn't. If the paint is just sitting on top of the fabric, it's going to crack. It's not designed to be used that way. But if we water it down and we really kind of swirl it down into the fabric, you're now dyeing the fabric, and you don't end up with that painted surface. So all the sanding's doing is knocking off some of the surface paint that you may have left behind. You'll always have some left behind, but it gets rid of it. This just feels like fabric now, right? This has that slightly rough raised texture because of the nap of the fabric. It's got that raised texture. If this was just a perfectly smooth, it would just, you wouldn't have that as well. So this is perfectly comfortable. People sitting in it are not going to get anything on them. You know, I'm running my hand all over it, and there's no color coming off even now, and you're not going to have a problem. So if you experience some of that flaking, it's because you didn't get the paint to soak down in. I would just sand all that surface paint off, wet your piece down, take a brush, don't add any more paint yet, take a brush and swirl all that down in, let it dry, sand it again, paint it again. That's how it, rather than pitching, right? Let's fix first is always my motto. So when we go to do our second coat, and again, I'm just using the same brush as yesterday. I wrapped it up in plastic because I really hate washing my paintbrushes. But I'm going to do exactly the same thing as yesterday. I'm going to kind of spritz my surface, and again, with this, I'm using like a real squirt water bottle, not my mister. That, you know, the mister is what I would use if I was blending colors on the front of a piece of furniture, where I just want a light misting of water. I don't want to douse it. Here, I'm a little bit more into dousing, right? So I'm not misting so much as I am making sure that I'm kind of wetting that fabric again. I don't want to soak it, but I do want it to be a little bit damp, so it's a little bit more accepting of my paint. Now, I will kind of squirt my brush as well, but only because it's been sitting overnight and I want it to get damp again. And again, I touched it. I did remember to wear painting pants today, just because it was a lot of stress yesterday trying not to get paint on my clothes. And I gotta tell you, there's a lot of people out there that dress up really nice for you guys on their videos. They you know. So if you haven't caught Dion Woods of the Turquoise Iris, fabulous paint artist. So if you haven't watched any of her videos, go and catch her. Turquoise Iris. She does a lot of beautiful, beautiful furniture, and she's beautiful right? She's lovely to look at. She wears lovely clothes and she doesn't get a spot of paint on her. And who the heck knows how she does that? I am not one of those people. My hands are covered. I'm covered. And sometimes you just have to accept, you know, who you are and how you operate, in which case I have to wear my paint pants. The problem for me is I've lost weight. So it's not a problem that I lost weight. It's a good thing I lost weight. But literally my paint pants now, I can pull on and off without undoing them. So it's a lovely thing to have happen. The reason I had to buy new pants, but I'm a little conscious of the fact that when I'm sitting down and standing up for you, I really just want to be hiking my pants back up. Hi, Diana. Nice to see you. Oh my gosh, I haven't seen you in forever, actually. Although I have been watching Libby grow, so thanks for posting that stuff on. That's part of the plus of something like Facebook, is keeping up with some of the lives, even vicariously, of people that you don't see as often, so you at least feel like you're kind of keeping in touch and keeping up with them. So you'll see that I'm still doing kind of that same motion. I'm rubbing that paint down into the fabric. I want it to sink down into the fabric. I'm staining the fabric, not taking my brush and laying a thick coat of the paint just on the surface. I want it to sink down in. So, you know, I start by putting it on there, but then I am pushing that paint down into it. I maybe make it look like I'm using more muscles than I am, but I'm not. It's not as hard work as you think. And it actually goes quite quickly. So even if you were looking at doing this on a much bigger piece, it goes a lot faster. And I would rather that you have watered your paint down and you end up doing more coats, so more thin coats, than saying, I'm done in 2. Don't push the fabric. The fabric is going to end up telling you how many coats you need. So you see that I'm taking this small brush because I'm a little challenged in getting that big brush into some of the crevices, and mostly on the trim, right? So mostly on those trim areas with the little rolls here. Sometimes that's where you'll end up seeing. And quite honestly, the rest of the fabric may be great, but you may find that, you know, after your second coat or third coat or however many you end up doing, you end up still having to go back into some of those little creases here and the little corners and the detail areas afterward, just for an extra little layer on there. That's okay. Every piece is going to be different because the fabric is different. I want to say that the nap of the fabric, I think that's a real fabric term. I am so not an upholsterer, hence the painting of the fabric and not recovering things, right? It's a whole different skill set. But again, the idea with even painting some of your fabric, you're starting with fabric that's still in pretty good shape, right? You're not going to be spending the time painting something that has rips and tears and is really worn, because you're not fixing the fabric, you're painting it. And the paint is not going to hide that. So I think sometimes that's where people as well maybe lay on more paint than they need in their items, because they're thinking somehow that it's like painting the wood furniture where, you know, we're hiding a multitude of sins under the layers of paint that we add. This isn't going to hide that. If you've got a rip, you've got a rip. If you've got a worn spot, you've got a strong worn spot, right? It's not going to be fixing that. It's not going to be hiding it, because we're not laying paint over those areas to mask them. We're getting the paint to sink down in. But I think that you can see already that we're getting this a much deeper, richer, and to my eye right now, a more even coverage, right? It's this side still in the back a little bit blotchy. I think that you can still see some of the original color peeking through. So we're kind of evening out that tone a little bit. But definitely even with this paint, I wasn't sure about the all-in-one paint. And the sanding, open paint cans, dog coming through, making sure that she's not taking it out. I've come home. There's a lot of times I finish painting something in the living room and I turn around and there's dog footprints going all the way up the stairs and across the dark hardwood, and it's like, and it always seems to be when I'm using the self-sealing paint, right? Not the stuff that I can just wipe off with water. Although I always use, regardless of what paint company I'm using, I am always using a water-based paint. I have no desire to be futzing with turpentine or mineral spirits, any of those kinds of things. I'm very susceptible to smells, tends to trigger bad headaches. So I am, and we already know I don't like cleaning my paintbrushes, let alone having to clean them in something like turpentine. It's enough for me to be washing them off in water. So I am always using products that, you know, the low to no VOCs. They don't have the smells. They're not going to trigger any of those things. They're not going to be poisonous if ingested. I mean, I'm not recommending that you drink any of your paints, but you know, for me and because of me, those are the products that I use. Additionally, because I am typically selling the pieces, and I only say typically because if I really, really hate a piece, I have a hard time trying to sell it. I tend to talk people out of it because they don't like it. So I'd rather repaint it and come up with something that I love. But because I'm typically selling my pieces, you know what? I want to use products that I feel comfortable with, that I feel happy with, that I'm thinking as well that it's going to be something that they feel comfortable having in their home. And the only reason that I haven't done this side is so that I have something to lean on. I've painted to here, but it's saving me from as well painting my shirt inadvertently, which again, it's what I would normally end up doing, ending up with all of my clothes covered in paint. And I used to I'd be painting, then I'd have to change to be able to run out to buy groceries or something, and then I'd come home and then I'd change again and paint. And that was just too exhausting. I don't have time for that. So I've gotten quite comfortable with racing out and doing some errands, totally covered in paint all the time. And I'm sure in my younger days I would have been a little bit more concerned about what people might think of me. And as I've gotten older, I care a heck of a lot less. I don't know if that's a good thing. I mean, in one side I'm thinking, that's a good thing. That shows a lot more confidence. I'm not as worried about what people think. I'm able to make my own decisions, not hampered by what would matter to other people. But then on the other side, and look, see, leant a little too far. I'm covered in paint again. Could have been my sleeve, but I rolled them back. So today, this is what I'm going to continue to do. I'm going to cover the rest of the piece in a second coat. I am going to go around to all of the trim with this brush and just kind of make sure that I'm dabbing into all of the creases, all of the crevices. When I'm done the piece, what I am doing as well is just taking a wet cloth and wiping down the wood so that the blue paint is, oh my God. All right, bless her heart. I mean, she's old. She's not, but she doesn't pick up her feet anymore because her hips are bad. So when she's walking past the camera, she steps over with the front feet, the cord, and then the back feet just start dragging the cord with her. And I just have visions of the whole thing going sailing. It's going to happen. Just one of these days, I won't be paying close enough attention. It will happen. But I will take the artist brush and just dab into all of those creases, crevices, making sure that that's covered. Take the wet cloth, wipe down the blue, just so it's one less color that I have to paint over with the white. And then we'll see where we're at tomorrow. I will sand it down again, just the same as I showed you today. So I fully expect this to feel a little bit crusty, so I'll take off those top notes again, sand it down, and then I'll make my decision about the waxing. But if I'm going to wax it, it will be after I do the white. So we'll come back together, I'll do the white, and then we'll see. We'll see how I'm feeling, because as long as I'm waxing the fabric, if that's what I'm doing, I'll wax the legs, even though I'm doing them in the all-in-one, just because I want to see what the final texture of this paint is as an all-in-one. And I gotta tell you, there's a lot of the all-in-ones in the marketplace that you know, they say you don't need primer. A lot of times you don't need primer if you're using, you know, chalk paints or the clay paints that the DIY. You don't necessarily need a primer. Any Sloan, you don't necessarily need a primer. But it depends. If you're painting over a dark wood like mahogany, if it's a really old piece and you think that some of the oils are going to bleed through, do a primer. You know, one that has some shellac in it, so that you're not having that bleed through. So there are times that you definitely need to prep. The piece that I did before this one with you guys, I didn't do a primer on it because there was no way it was going to bleed. It's not that type of wood. But I added a coat of a product that was designed to go over really slick, shiny surfaces, just so that my paint would grab a little bit better. And I didn't have to worry about it. So there's more prep sometimes than you may be led to believe. And I think that because of that, and people aren't necessarily informing you of the need to have to prime certain things, or that you may want to use certain products to add some grip, because the surface is just too slick or too shiny, and then you're finding that it's scratching too easily even after it's cured. So these all-in-ones, what some of the difference is what does the final texture feel like? If I find, you know, that some of them still leave a really chalky texture, and I don't like that. You know, it feels unfinished to me. So I'm not as happy if I am using an all-in-one product and still having to add wax or a top coat to it. There's no problem in doing that, but then I could be using a chalk paint. I could be using any paint, in which case it's not really an advantage. And if that's their claim to fame, then we'll see. There is an all-in-one product in the US that's called Heirloom Traditions. And it was the first one that I ever discovered before I found that there were some Canadian companies. This one that I'm using right now, Country Chic, just discovered it. It's an all-in-one. I bought the white to do on the legs so I could see for myself what the texture is like. There's Fusion Mineral Paint here in Canada as well. It dries to a chalky texture. Now, I use Fusion for a number of things, but I very rarely use it as a finished coat and then leave it unfinished, leave it without adding another coat because of the texture. So I will use it when I need something durable. I will often use it as an undercoat when I want to distress back to that. So maybe I'm doing a piece, I'll paint it all black in Fusion, and then I'll use my chalk paints over top and wet distress back so that I'm revealing the black, because it dries like rock hard. You're not going to easily distress back down to it, and I'm not going to be able to wet distress back. So there's strategically sometimes that I use them. Heirloom Traditions in the States, though, they're all-in-one dries to a smooth finish. It self-levels, but it's got a little bit of a smooth, it feels like there has been a top coat put on top of it. I love that product. However, it's in the US. It costs me, so I have to pay, obviously, the conversion rates from US dollars to Canadian dollars, which makes it a lot more expensive. And the shipping fees for that product up here to Canada, it almost doubles the price of the paint. So it makes it way too expensive. But I will say that there are times that I'm going to have to visit my brother in the States, and I get paint shipped to his house, and I pick it up and bring it back. So it's an awesome product. I would dearly love for them to have a distributor up here in Canada. Heirloom Traditions, if you're listening, get a distributor up here in Canada. Or call me, whatever. But different paint works differently. So, you know, play with it. See what works for you. So I'm going to continue painting this, get it done before I'm jumping on to some coaching calls. Good thing they can't see what I look like. I'm just on a call. So I can sound professional even though I'm in my old fat paint covered jeans. I'm going to get this done and then it'll be dried off tomorrow. I'll sand it and then we'll come back and we'll look at doing some of the white together and make some decisions following that as to whether or not we need to add wax or not. Thanks for joining me today. Hope that this is answering some of your questions about painting fabric and some of the tips along the way in terms of color mixings and things, but hit me up with some other questions. So if you have them, put them in the comments below. I'll try and get to all of them and answer them, or come on to the next one and hit me with them then. Take care. Have an awesome day.